Thanks for that introduction. Every time I hear about this person, I think, wow, what an amazing guy. I say, oh, that's me. Okay. Better get up there and follow up really well. But thank you, Carly, for inviting me to speak on this topic. It would take probably about 18 minutes to really unpack PTSD, but I won't do that. I'll do it in about 11, trying to keep with the schedule and everything. But I've got a few notes here to try to keep myself focused on just what we need to discuss. The past is never dead. It's not even past. That's William Faulkner. Bodies speak. Bodies emote. Bodies remember. Darnell Moore writes that bodies are recorders of histories, recalling life's journeys, calling forth blissful memories, summoning the joys and the pains, the hurts and the healings, that which we choose to remember, even that which we will to forget. Subject to corporeal terrorism and what Jennifer Cole terms ontological assault, some bodies seem to be more killable than others, often by means of racism, other times by imperialist projects of colonization, and pervasively by capitalist modes of exploitation, particularly on persons of color. Darnell holds that blackness is a response to the pain caused by this terror. Simply, blackness signs the process of remaking, the remaking of the self, a reimagining of the body, and a reconstruction of the world in light of these powerful forces. Now, triangling on this phenomenon is Victoria Burrows. She argues that trauma theory still operates within an epistemological framework that privileges whiteness. She argues that racism is one of the major traumas of this or any century, and trauma theory has to acknowledge and examine, instead of accepting, whiteness as a normative category. Burrows moves on to suggest that we urgently need a comprehensive remapping of trauma theory that is not white-centric and gender-blind. I want to quote from her briefly. Until the daily occurrence of racial trauma becomes an important part of trauma history and trauma theory, it will be addressing neither the structural nor the historical traumas of the 20th century, nor will it provide a viable theoretical paradigm for the 21st. As a family therapist, I am well versed in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is a bigger and bigger book driven by the medical model. We have many, many more categories than we did a few years ago to name people and label people. And I don't have time to talk about the pros and cons of all that diagnostic labeling. Suffice it to say that a pro is that some patients do accrue benefits from being able to explain their most distressing symptoms. They're the scariest stuff they've gone through. Be able to hang those symptoms on a diagnostic hook or category, and sometimes that's a source of relief. To be able to explain, to sort of name it. Panic attacks, anyone? Ever had a panic attack? Probably. Until you knew what that was, you probably felt like you were dying, like it was a heart attack or respiratory failure or something like that, right? So to find out, oh, that was a panic attack, provides a sense of relief. So that's the pro. Having said that, PTSD, in my opinion, is a problematic diagnostic category. PTSD is problematic because stresses associated with any unresolved events produce profound discontinuity and often represent an ongoing condition or circumstance. I work with displaced peoples, and believe you me, losing one's home and all your possessions, being ripped out of your community and just dropped someplace else, like a refugee camp, and then winding up in a host culture that's very unlike your original context. That's an event that doesn't quit. On top of this, ongoing experiences such as sociocultural oppression and discrimination, such as that experienced by politically persecuted peoples, and also visible minorities, they don't end with a nice, neat Hollywood ending. These are ever-present situations. We don't really ever get out from underneath them. And combine that with the possibility of flashbacks, this raises the question of whether symptoms can be designated as occurring after or post an event or events that are still happening right now. If a client's reliving, say, the first time they killed someone, when they were 9 years old and they were a child soldier, they killed a 10-year-old girl on the opposing side. Is that event really over, especially if they're having a vivid flashback of that event? You know, I have some colleagues at the Canadian Center for Victims of Torture downtown, and if someone's having a really vivid flashback of the fourth time they were assaulted in an interrogation room, I mean, it's hard to tell that person that, oh, so you're experiencing PTSD, because they don't really feel like they're post-trauma. I mean, it's still something that's with them right now. I would term these kinds of traumas as exceptional. So what about everyday trauma? Well, I work a lot with immigrant families and intercultural and multiracial couples and families. So the question of what happened and what's happening goes through each family member's filters. And conversations ensue both at home and in therapy about people's take or perception of an event, both recent and historical. Now, if somebody, say the mother of multiracial children's out shopping at the mall, and they are there and someone comes up and, I mean, there's never a stupid question in class, but sometimes there really are some stupid questions out there. And one of them would be, if you were at the mall and someone comes up to you and says, oh, are you the babysitter for your own kids? People get hit with that a lot because there's differences in pigmentation and hair texture between parents and their children, so they get hit up with this question like, so are you the babysitter? Oh, those are the lovely children. Are you working for the family? And if you come home and you tell your partner, well, I got hit up with this thing again, and they say, oh, I'm so sorry, honey, that is really such an annoying, stupid question, then you feel supported. Someone understands, someone gets it back at home. I do a lot of research on trauma and resilience. Probably the best resource we can have, something that can really trump severe or even complex PTSD, is social support. Knowing that someone close to you understands what you're going through, somebody knows your struggle, someone who gets it. And that's terrific. But what happens when the people closest to us fail to demonstrate this kind of understanding, when they can't lend us that kind of social support? Okay, well, sometimes I'll note people will employ a discourse of hypersensitivity. Sometimes they'll say, well, aren't you just being overly sensitive? You know, why are you getting upset about this thing? And I do some research on intercultural and interracial couples, and sometimes I'll see a situation come up where they don't seem to understand what's going on with their partner. So couple quick examples. Say a black male, white female couple's driving down the road. They get pulled over for speeding 7 kilometers over the limit. The constable writes a ticket. What just happened? Okay. Well, different people have different interpretations. The white female partner might say, well, you were speeding, so you got a ticket. The black male partner might say, you know, come on, I wasn't going over that much. You know, he probably gave me a ticket because he saw me with you. Right? She's like, well, I don't want to think that's happening because I want to see things as I want to see them. I want to think people are that way. And he's saying, well, you don't get it. This happens all the time. I got fouled in the store, last week. Security were after me for that. And, okay, so, when the lousy service comes up at a restaurant or an issue with colleagues at work, it's possible that a white partner or a white therapist might dismiss a person of color's experience or just sort of passively remain oblivious to their experience. But that's damaging to that personal relationship or to the professional relationship. One partner doesn't have to, in that sense, doesn't have the other person's back. And whatever stress or trauma that's being experienced is compounded or exacerbated because persons close to that person aren't supportive, aren't getting it, or perhaps maybe even have something invested in not understanding. So I would say these kinds of situations, incidents, would be considered everyday traumas. The fact that those things happen all the time, but also sometimes people don't seem to really understand or support them through those experiences, another level of a trauma or a rupture in their social support system. How am I doing so far? 5? Don't ask, because then they'll tell you. Okay. Okay, quickly. Okay, so that's the discourse of hypersensitivity. Then there's another discourse of history's insignificance. This discourse is convenient. It pays big dividends. I mean, people are sometimes deliberately sort of social amnesiacs. They want to forget. It pays big dividends because whites avoid accountability and guilt for benefiting from racist institutions and practices. They can dismiss history as irrelevant or boring. It's just a laundry list. It's one darn thing after another. Why do we have to go through all that history? Persons of color get some benefits because they can avoid talking about legacies that have been heretofore too painful to discuss. But as Toni Morrison writes, the process of memory is trying hard not to remember, but failing at it. People act like they don't recall, but they do. It's just that they have learned to observe a code of silence around taboo subjects. And so for my research work, qualitative interviews, here's some examples, some quotations. So why was Grandma so light? Wait, what does it mean that she was from the southern US? Why doesn't anybody talk about her? How come no one wants to talk about whether it was a slave situation or not? Okay. So these discourses of hypersensitivity and history's insignificance, they're not pathological. I mean, they're strategic responses. They're survival strategies for couples who often face negative public reactions and a lack of acceptance from their partners' families. I mean, what better way to respond to a society that views even talking about race at all, race talk, racial relations and history as bad form, something you don't discuss in mixed company, or altogether too transgressive. In conclusion, I prefer the term traumatic stress because it moves away from an assumption contained in the term like PTSD that a societal institution like slavery or systematic rape or genocide or social phenomena like racism are things that are over, that they're done, that we're in a post-period for. In terms of best practices, I like to use systemic therapeutic approaches, such as narrative therapy, because they open space for subaltern persons, couples, and families to share their experiences and practices as ongoing struggles for viability and survival. Other therapeutic approaches are often focused on pure utility, and they show that they're very effective, but sometimes they may intentionally or unintentionally support the political status quo. By acknowledging historical and ongoing racism, professionals can go beyond being just agents of social control and governance and become agents of social transformation instead, working collectively to trace transformable and just forms of life. Thanks.